Aliens challenged humanity's average. PeopleAnd learned what that really means the morning Sarah. Chen spilled coffee on her lab coat was the same morning humanity's fate would be decided by beings from across the galaxy. She didn't know this yet, of course. She was just a mid-level researcher at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, running late for another mundane day of testing soil samples for radiation levels. The coffee stain was still spreading across her white coat when the sky above Portland began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Then the ships appeared. They didn't descend dramatically like in the movies. Instead, they simply materialized, as if someone had adjusted the focus on reality itself. Sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around their edges hovered silently above major cities across Earth. No dramatic entrance music, no threatening postures. They just waited. Sarah pressed her face against the laboratory window, watching the alien craft hang motionless above the city skyline. Around her, colleagues abandoned their experiments and gathered at windows, their voices a mixture of excitement and terror. The global communications networks exploded with activity. Every news channel, every social media platform, every government frequency buzzed with the same impossible reality. We were no longer alone. The aliens made contact exactly 72 hours after their arrival. Not with world leaders or military commanders, but through every electronic device on Earth simultaneously. Televisions, smartphones, digital billboards, even electronic car displays all showed the same message in every human language. Greetings, inhabitants of the third planet. We are the Galactic Council of Superior Civilizations. Your species has reached a level of technological development that requires evaluation. The being that appeared on screen looked remarkably unremarkable, humanoid in shape, but with skin that seemed to shift between silver and blue, large dark eyes, and a voice that somehow conveyed both authority and condescension. We are Archon Zephyr of the Council. Your world will be tested to determine your worthiness to join civilized galactic society. However, we must inform you that preliminary observations of your species have been disappointing. Sarah felt her coffee mug slip from her fingers, shattering on the laboratory floor. Around the world, billions of humans held their breath. Your people appear remarkably average, Zephyr continued. Your technology is rudimentary. Your social structures are chaotic. Your individuals seem focused on trivial pursuits rather than advancement of knowledge or consciousness. We have observed similar species across the galaxy, and frankly, you are among the least impressive we have encountered. The alien paused, and Sarah could swear she saw something like boredom in those dark eyes. Nevertheless, the Council believes in fairness. You will be given a chance to prove your species possesses some redeeming qualities. We will select random individuals from your population to face challenges that will test your worth. These will not be your leaders, your warriors, or your greatest minds. We want to see what your average citizens are truly capable of. Sarah's heart pounded. Average citizens. People like her. The challenges will test various aspects of your species: intelligence, creativity, adaptability, cooperation, and what you might call character. Failure in these tests will result in your species being classified as a Class D civilization, suitable only for resource extraction and basic labor under galactic supervision. The laboratory had fallen completely silent. Sarah could hear her own breathing unnaturally loud in the stillness. Success, though we consider it unlikely given our observations, would earn you junior membership status in the Galactic Council, with access to advanced technologies and trade opportunities. You have 48 Earth hours to prepare. The selection process will begin then. The transmission ended abruptly. Every screen went black for exactly 10 seconds, then returned to normal programming. But nothing would ever be normal again. In the hours that followed, the world erupted into chaos. Stock markets crashed. Religious leaders proclaimed everything from the end times to the dawn of a new age. Scientists worked frantically to understand the technology that had hijacked every electronic device on the planet simultaneously. Sarah returned to her small apartment that evening in a daze. The streets were filled with people, some celebrating, others weeping, most just standing around looking lost. She climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, stepped over her neighbor's cat who always lurked in the hallway, and sat down at her kitchen table. She was 32 years old, had a master's degree in environmental science, drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic, and lived alone except for her goldfish, Newton. By any measure, she was exactly the kind of average person the aliens seemed to disdain. But as Sarah sat there, staring at her reflection in her dark apartment window with the alien ships visible as distant lights in the sky, she found herself getting angry. Average? She thought about her work documenting contamination in groundwater systems, work that helped protect drinking water for thousands of people. She thought about her weekend volunteer shifts at the animal shelter, her efforts to help her elderly neighbor with grocery shopping, her habit of leaving positive reviews for small local businesses. She thought about her friend Marcus, a high school teacher who spent his own money buying supplies for students whose families couldn't afford them, about her sister Lisa, a nurse who worked double shifts during flu season to help understaffed hospitals, about her co-worker Pete, who had taught himself 3 languages just because he enjoyed learning about other cultures. Were these things trivial? Were these people average in the way that implied worthless? The more Sarah thought about it, the angrier she became. Not the explosive kind of anger, but the slow-burning type that hardens into determination. The aliens clearly had no idea what they were dealing with. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Are you okay, honey? This is all so scary." Sarah looked at the message for a long time before typing back. "I'm fine, Mom, don't worry. I think these aliens are about to learn something they weren't expecting." Outside her window, the alien ships continued their silent vigil, waiting to test humanity's worth. They had dismissed humans as average, unremarkable, barely worthy of their attention. Sarah Chen, environmental scientist and coffee spiller, had news for them. They had no idea what average actually meant when it came to human beings. The selection would begin tomorrow. Sarah found herself almost looking forward to it. The selection began at exactly noon, Greenwich Mean Time, just as Archon Zephyr had promised. Sarah was washing dishes in her kitchen when the world went white. Not a blinding flash, but a gentle, encompassing brightness that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When her vision cleared, she was standing in what appeared to be an enormous crystalline chamber alongside 19 other confused humans. The space defied physics as Sarah understood it. The walls seemed to stretch infinitely upward while somehow maintaining an intimate feel. Soft light emanated from surfaces that looked like living crystal, pulsing gently in rhythm with something that might have been a heartbeat. "Welcome, test subjects," came Zephyr's voice from everywhere at once. "You have been selected as representative samples of your species." Sarah looked around at her fellow humans. There was a middle-aged man in a mechanic's uniform with grease still under his fingernails, a young woman wearing a coffee shop apron, an elderly lady clutching a purse, a teenager in a school uniform, a man in a business suit who kept checking his watch. None of them looked like heroes or geniuses or anyone particularly special, which, Sarah realized, was exactly the point. "Allow me to introduce your testing companions," Zephyr continued, and the air shimmered to reveal a dozen other beings scattered throughout the chamber. The first group that materialized consisted of tall, elegant creatures with skin like polished marble and eyes that seemed to hold starlight. "The Ethereal Collective," Zephyr announced, masters of pure logic and mathematical precision. Their civilization has eliminated emotion and inefficiency. Next came beings that looked like living geometric shapes, constantly shifting and rearranging themselves. The crystalline hierarchy. They have achieved perfect order through absolute conformity. Each individual knows their exact place and function. More aliens appeared. The hive-linked, who moved in perfect unison as a single consciousness. The apex predators, whose society was built on strength and dominance. The synthetic ascended, who had uploaded their minds to achieve immortal digital existence. Each of these civilizations represents the pinnacle of evolutionary development, Zephyr explained. They will also undergo testing, though we expect their performance to far exceed yours. This is merely a formality to demonstrate the vast gap between developed species and whatever you are. The mechanic, whose name tag read Frank, raised his hand. "Excuse me, your worship or whatever, but did you seriously just call us here to watch other people take tests? Because I got a transmission to rebuild back home, and old Mrs. Patterson needs her car running by tomorrow." Sarah blinked in surprise at Frank's casual tone. Several of the other aliens made sounds that might have been shock or amusement. Zephyr's expression didn't change. "You will all participate in the same challenges. The comparison will be educational." The first test materialized around them. They stood in a vast maze whose walls constantly shifted and changed. "Navigate to the center," Zephyr instructed. You have 1 hour. Begin. The ethereal collective immediately began calculating optimal pathways, their voices joining in mathematical harmony. The crystalline hierarchy formed precise formations and moved with military precision. The hive linked spread out to map the maze systematically. The humans, meanwhile, did what humans always do in confusing situations. They started talking to each other. "I'm Sarah," she said to the teenager beside her. "What's your name?" "Jenny. I was just at school like an hour ago." "This is so weird." Jenny looked around nervously. "I'm not good at mazes. I always get lost in corn mazes back home." "That's okay," said the elderly lady, introducing herself as Agnes. "My Harold always said 2 heads are better than 1. Maybe we should stick together?" Frank nodded. "Makes sense. I'm Frank. Fix engines for a living, but I reckon we can figure this out." He looked at the shifting walls with a practiced eye. These walls, they're moving in patterns. Just like troubleshooting electrical problems, there's always a system to it. The coffee shop worker, Maria, pointed upward. "Look, there are gaps between some of the wall sections when they move. Maybe we can climb." "I used to do rock climbing," offered David, the businessman. "I could boost people up if needed." As the humans began working together, sharing ideas and supporting each other's suggestions, the aliens around them grew increasingly confused. The ethereal collective had calculated 17 different optimal paths, but couldn't agree on which was most efficient. The crystalline hierarchy had formed a perfect formation, but were now stuck because none of them were authorized to make decisions without consulting their absent leadership. The humans, meanwhile, had developed a completely different strategy. Frank had identified the pattern in the wall movements. Maria spotted the climbing opportunities. Agnes, with decades of experience reading people, was directing the group's emotional dynamics. Jenny, despite her fear, was small enough to squeeze through gaps and scout ahead. David used his business experience to coordinate timing, but it was Sarah who made the crucial observation. "Wait," she said, stopping the group halfway through the maze. "Has anyone else noticed that we're thinking about this wrong?" "What do you mean?" asked Frank. Sarah pointed to the constantly shifting walls. "Look at the pattern. The walls aren't just moving randomly. They're responding to us. When the ethereal collective calculated their path over there, the walls shifted to block them. When the crystalline hierarchy formed their formation, new barriers appeared." She gestured to their own progress. "But when we started working together and helping each other, the walls started creating openings. This isn't just a navigation test. It's testing how we approach problems." Agnes smiled. "Smart girl. So what do you think we should do?" Sarah looked around at her fellow humans, average people who had been pulled from their ordinary lives and thrown into an impossible situation. "I think we should do what we're already doing. Help each other. Share what we know. Trust each other." The group continued through the maze, but now with a deeper understanding. When Frank struggled to climb over a high wall, David and Maria boosted him up and he pulled them after. When Jenny got scared in a narrow passage, Agnes took her hand and told her stories about her grandchildren to keep her calm. When David second-guessed a direction, Sarah and the others backed his decision with confidence. The maze seemed to respond to their cooperation. Walls opened where they needed to pass. Handholds appeared when they needed to climb. Bridges extended when they needed to cross gaps. They reached the center in 37 minutes. The other alien teams were still struggling in the outer sections of the maze, trapped by their rigid thinking and inability to adapt their preconceived strategies. "Fascinating," Zephyr murmured as the maze dissolved around them. "Most irregular." Frank wiped his hands on his uniform. "Not really. That's just how we do things. Help each other out. Work together. Basic human stuff." Sarah looked around at the aliens who were staring at the humans with expressions ranging from confusion to something that might have been concern. "Is there another test?" she asked. "Because we're just getting started." The second test space materialized as a workshop filled with impossible tools and materials that seemed to shift between states of matter. Workbenches made of what looked like crystallized light held implements that hummed with energy. Piles of raw materials glowed softly, their properties clearly beyond anything found on Earth. "Creativity assessment," Zephyr announced. "Using the provided materials and tools, create something that solves a problem. You have 2 hours. The solutions will be evaluated based on innovation, functionality, and elegance of design. The ethereal collective immediately began scanning the materials with mathematical precision, running calculations on optimal configurations. Their leader, a being who introduced himself as Prime Logic Unit 7, began sketching complex blueprints in the air with movements that left glowing traces. The crystalline hierarchy formed a perfect circle around their designated workspace and began a formal procedure that seemed to involve each member contributing exactly one component idea in predetermined order. The synthetic ascended started downloading material properties directly into their digital consciousnesses, processing thousands of combinations per second. The humans, predictably, started poking things to see what would happen. "Ooh, this feels like memory foam, but it's glowing," Maria said, pressing her hand into a silvery substance that molded around her fingers and stayed that way. "And this stuff," Frank picked up what looked like metal wire. "It's conducting something, but not electricity. Feel this." He handed it to Jenny, who immediately passed it to Agnes. "Warm," Agnes noted, "but not hot warm. More like happy warm?" Sarah found herself drawn to a collection of tools that seemed to anticipate what she wanted to do with them. When she thought about cutting something, a tool that looked like a scalpel made of light appeared in her hand. When she considered joining two pieces of material, the tool shifted into something like a welder that worked by thought rather than heat. "What kind of problem are we supposed to solve?" David asked, looking around the workshop. "They didn't specify anything." "Maybe that's the point," Sarah said. "Maybe we get to choose the problem." Jenny was playing with a material that looked like clay but behaved like liquid until she concentrated on it, at which point it held whatever shape she was thinking about. "This is so cool. It's like it reads minds." Frank had found a collection of what appeared to be springs and gears, except they moved in ways that defied physics, transferring motion in impossible directions. "These would revolutionize my entire shop," he muttered, then looked up at the others. "What problems do we actually want to solve?" Agnes sat down on a bench that adjusted itself to perfectly support her aging back. "Well, my grandson has diabetes, always having to check his blood sugar, monitor his insulin. Scared he'll have a reaction when we're not around." Maria nodded. "My little sister has hearing problems. We can't afford the good hearing aids, and the cheap ones just make everything louder, including the background noise." "I got a buddy lost his leg in Afghanistan," Frank added. "Prosthetic he's got now works okay, but it doesn't feel like part of him, you know? Just a tool." Sarah looked around at her fellow humans, then at the alien materials. "What if we don't make one thing? What if we make several things that work together?" While the humans continued their discussion, the other alien teams had settled into their respective approaches. The ethereal collective was constructing what appeared to be a perfect geometric sculpture that hummed with mathematical harmonies. The crystalline hierarchy was building a complex tower with each level representing a different aspect of their ordered society. The humans, meanwhile, had spread out across multiple workstations and were creating what looked like complete chaos. Frank was building something that looked like a mechanical nervous system, using the physics-defying springs and gears. Maria was working with materials that responded to sound waves, shaping them into intricate organic forms. Agnes was weaving the emotional conducting wire into patterns that seemed to pulse with life. Jenny was using the thought-responsive clay to create interfaces that felt more like extensions of the human body than separate devices. Sarah was working with the light tools to create connective systems that would allow all their individual creations to work together. "What exactly are you building?" Zephyr asked, floating over to observe the human's workspace. "Adaptive prosthetics," Frank said without looking up from his work. "This gear system responds to nerve impulses and muscle tension. It'll feel like a real limb." "Bio-responsive environmental monitors," Maria added, shaping her sound-responsive materials. "They detect changes in body chemistry and adjust treatment automatically. For diabetes, allergies, medication management." "Emotional interface networks," Agnes explained, holding up her wire patterns. "They help isolated people maintain connection with their support networks. For elderly folks or people with depression or anyone who needs to feel less alone." "Intuitive communication amplifiers," Jenny said, her clay forms shifting into elegant curves. "They don't just make sound louder. They help the brain process and understand audio information better." Sarah stepped back to show how her light connectors could link all the devices together. and a coordination system that lets all these technologies share information and adapt to each user's specific needs. Zephyr stared at their collection of interconnected devices. You have created multiple solutions? We've created a network of solutions, Sarah corrected. None of these problems exist in isolation. A person with diabetes might also have hearing problems. Someone with a prosthetic limb might also deal with depression. An elderly person might have multiple medical needs and feel socially isolated. Frank wiped his hands on his uniform. Plus, this way everyone gets what they need. Not just one person getting one perfect thing. The efficiency is suboptimal, observed Prime Logic Unit 7. You should have focused your resources on creating one superior solution, Agnes. Looked at the ethereal collective's geometric sculpture, which was undeniably beautiful and mathematically perfect, but seemed to serve no practical purpose. Superior for who, dear? Your geometric sculpture is very pretty, Maria added diplomatically, but what problem does it solve? It demonstrates the inherent mathematical beauty of optimal design, Prime Logic Unit 7 responded. That's nice, Jenny said, but it doesn't help anyone. The crystalline hierarchy's tower was similarly impressive, but seemed to exist mainly to showcase their hierarchical social structure. The synthetic ascended had created a digital interface that would allow organic beings to upload their consciousness, which the humans found disturbing rather than helpful. Time remaining. 30 minutes, Zephyr announced. The humans spent the remaining time refining their interconnected devices, but mostly they talked. They talked about Agnes's grandson and how the diabetes monitor would alert his family if something was wrong. They talked about Maria's sister and how the communication amplifier would help her succeed in school. They talked about Frank's friend and how the adaptive prosthetic would let him feel whole again. They talked about hope. When time was called, Zephyr examined all the solutions. The alien creations were technically impressive, mathematically elegant, and utterly without practical application. The human creations were interconnected, adaptable, and designed around solving real problems for real people. Your solution lacks aesthetic unity, Zephyr observed. Sarah looked around at their collection of devices, each one different but all connected, each one designed for a specific need but able to work with the others. It's not supposed to be unified. It's supposed to be useful. But you could have created one perfect device, Zephyr insisted. Frank laughed. There is no one perfect device. People aren't perfect. Life isn't perfect. Our stuff works because it adapts to reality, not because it tries to impose perfection on it. Zephyr made notes on a device that appeared in its hands. The expression on the alien's face was unreadable, but Sarah thought she detected a flicker of something that might have been uncertainty. Interesting approach, Zephyr finally said. Next test. As their creations dissolved back into raw materials, Agnes patted Sarah's arm. I think we're teaching them something they didn't expect to learn. Sarah nodded, watching the alien teams regroup with visible confusion. I hope they're ready for the rest of the lesson. The third test dropped them into chaos without warning. One moment they were standing in the crystalline chamber. The next they found themselves scattered across what appeared to be a city under siege. Buildings burned around them. The ground shook with explosions. An alien war machine stalked through streets filled with panicked civilians from a dozen different species. Adaptability assessment. Zephyr's voice echoed through the destruction. You are relief workers responding to a catastrophic event. Restore order, provide aid, and demonstrate your ability to function under extreme stress. Time limit, 3 hours. Sarah picked herself up from where she'd materialized behind an overturned vehicle. Around her, the other humans were doing the same, automatically checking each other for injuries despite having been scattered by the teleportation. Everyone okay? Frank called out, his voice carrying clearly over the din of simulated disaster. I'm fine, Agnes replied from somewhere to Sarah's left. But there's a hurt child over here. Without hesitation, the humans began moving toward Agnes's voice. The alien teams, meanwhile, were taking completely different approaches to the crisis. The ethereal collective had formed a geometric pattern in the middle of a burning plaza and was calculating optimal resource distribution algorithms. Their mathematical precision was admirable, but while they calculated, alien civilians continued to flee in terror around them. The crystalline hierarchy had established a command post, and was setting up proper chains of authority. Unfortunately, they were spending most of their time determining who should be in charge of what, while buildings continued to collapse nearby. The synthetic Ascended were attempting to interface directly with the city's systems to restore digital order, but the panicked organic civilians couldn't understand their electronic communications. The humans found Agnes kneeling beside a small being that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a salamander. The creature was making distressed chirping sounds and holding what appeared to be an injured limb. "Poor little thing," Agnes murmured, using the universal language of gentle hands and soothing voice that worked across species. "Maria, you're good with animals from working at the coffee shop, right?" "I help at the animal shelter on weekends," Maria said, moving carefully to examine the injured creature. "Jenny, can you see if there's anything we can use as a splint?" While they worked on the immediate medical situation, Frank was already assessing the broader crisis. "David, you know about logistics from your business stuff. What do you think we need to prioritize?" David looked around at the chaos with the same analytical eye he used for quarterly reports. "Triage. Get people to safety first, then worry about infrastructure. Sarah, you're good at seeing patterns. Where are people trying to go?" Sarah studied the flow of panicking civilians. Different species were fleeing in different directions, but there were patterns. "There." She pointed to a large building with thick walls that seemed mostly intact. "They're all heading toward that structure. Probably a designated emergency shelter. But look," Jenny added, pointing to a pile of debris blocking the main entrance. "They can't get in." Frank was already moving. "I can clear that. Need some muscle, though." Without being asked, David and several other humans fell in to help Frank move the debris. Agnes continued treating the injured creature while also directing other wounded civilians toward Maria, who had organized an impromptu first aid station using materials scavenged from the destroyed buildings. Jenny and Sarah worked together to guide confused and panicked aliens toward the shelter, using a combination of hand gestures, simple words, and the kind of patient persistence that came from helping lost tourists or directing traffic around construction sites. "This is highly irregular," came a voice behind them. Sarah turned to see Prime Logic Unit 7 approaching with several other ethereal collective members. "You are not following optimal crisis management protocols." "What protocols?" Frank asked, hauling a particularly large piece of debris out of the way. "Standard emergency response requires establishing command hierarchy, conducting resource assessment, implementing systematic triage procedures, and coordinating with local authorities," Prime Logic Unit 7 recited. Agnes looked up from bandaging another injured civilian. "Honey, there are no local authorities here. This is a test, and while you've been figuring out protocols, we've treated 14 injured people and cleared an escape route for about 200 civilians. Your methods lack systematic organization," Prime Logic Unit 7 insisted. "They work," Maria said simply, guiding another group of alien civilians toward the shelter. "Look around. Are people safer than they were 20 minutes ago?" Indeed, the immediate area around the humans had become noticeably more organized, not through rigid hierarchy, but through the kind of organic cooperation that emerges when people focus on helping rather than controlling. Agnes had become the de facto medical coordinator, not because anyone appointed her, but because she was good at calming scared patients and organizing supplies. Frank naturally took charge of the heavy work and infrastructure problems. David coordinated resource movement with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing supply chains. Maria's experience with customer service made her excellent at communicating with different species. Jenny's youth and energy made her perfect for running messages and supplies between groups. Sarah found herself naturally moving between all the different efforts, helping coordinate and identify needs as they arose. It wasn't a formal hierarchy. It was people doing what they were good at because it needed to be done. "Your organizational structure is incomprehensible," observed a member of the crystalline hierarchy who had approached to study their methods. "How do you determine authority? Who makes final decisions?" "We all do," Sarah said, helping an elderly alien who reminded her of a walking tree branch navigate around some debris. "We just talk to each other and figure out what makes sense." "That is impossible. Complex operations require clear command structures." Frank paused in his work clearing another blocked passage. "Does it, though? When my neighborhood had that ice storm last winter, we didn't elect a leader or create committees. Mrs. Henderson cooked for everyone because she had a gas stove. Mike from 3 houses down chainsawed the fallen trees because he had the tools. The teenage kids ran supplies between houses because they could handle the ice better. We all just helped with what we could help with. But how did you coordinate? The crystalline being pressed. We talked to each other, Agnes said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. By the 2-hour mark, the humans had established 3 functioning aid stations, cleared multiple evacuation routes, set up a basic communication network using runners and simple signals, and had organized the alien civilians into groups based on their immediate needs rather than their species or social status. The other teams were still organizing. The Ethereal Collective had developed a perfect resource distribution algorithm, but hadn't actually distributed any resources. The crystalline hierarchy had established a complete command structure, but were stuck waiting for authorization from absent higher authorities. The synthetic ascended had successfully interfaced with city systems, but couldn't help the organic beings who didn't speak digital languages. Time, Zephyr announced, and the simulation froze around them. The destruction vanished, replaced by the crystalline chamber. But the alien civilians remained for a moment longer. Before disappearing, several of them approached the humans with gestures that clearly meant gratitude, regardless of species. Fascinating, Zephyr murmured, studying readings from a device that had materialized in its hands. Your stress response patterns are unusual. How so? Sarah asked. Most species become more rigid under stress. They follow established protocols more strictly, defer more completely to authority, organize into more formal hierarchies for security. Zephyr looked up from its device. Your species appears to become more flexible under stress, more creative, more cooperative. Jenny wiped sweat from her forehead. Well, yeah. When things get crazy, you can't stick to the plan because there isn't a plan anymore. You just have to help people and figure it out as you go. But how do you maintain order without hierarchy? Asked a member of the crystalline hierarchy. Who says we don't have hierarchy? David asked. Agnes was in charge of medical stuff because she's good at it. Frank was in charge of heavy lifting because he's strong. We just didn't waste time arguing about who was in charge of everything. Frank nodded. When stuff hits the fan, you don't have time for politics. You just do what needs doing. Zephyr made more notes. Your approach appears to prioritize immediate effectiveness over systematic organization. Our approach prioritizes helping people, Agnes corrected gently. The organization happens naturally, around that goal. Sarah noticed that several of the alien team members were now studying the humans with expressions that seemed less condescending and more thoughtful. Next test, Zephyr announced, but its tone had changed slightly. Less certain, more curious. Bring it on, Frank said, and Sarah realized that somewhere during the last 3 tests, her fellow humans had stopped being nervous about these challenges. They were starting to enjoy them. The 4th test materialized as something that looked deceptively simple, a circular room with 20 pedestals arranged around the perimeter. Each pedestal held what appeared to be a puzzle box, glowing softly with internal light. Cooperation assessment, Zephyr announced. Each puzzle box contains part of a larger solution. To succeed, all species must work together to combine your individual solutions into one unified answer. However, sharing your puzzle's secrets will make you vulnerable to exploitation by other teams. The implications hung heavy in the crystalline air. To win, everyone had to cooperate. But cooperation meant revealing weaknesses that others could exploit. Additionally, Zephyr continued, only one team can be declared the winner of this challenge. All other teams will be considered to have failed. The Ethereal Collective immediately moved to their puzzles and began working in perfect mathematical isolation, their glowing blueprints carefully shielded from the view of other teams. The crystalline hierarchy formed a defensive formation around their puzzles, with guards ensuring no other species could observe their work. The synthetic ascended constructed digital firewalls around their area, blocking both visual and electronic surveillance. The humans looked at their puzzles, then looked at each other, then looked around at the other teams building walls and barriers. Well, this is stupid, Frank said cheerfully. Frank, Agnes chided gently. Language. Sorry, Mrs. Agnes, but come on. Frank gestured around the room. They want us all to work together, but they're telling us only one team can win. So everyone's building walls instead of actually working together. Sarah examined her puzzle box. It was definitely part of something larger. She could see connection points where other pieces would fit, and the pattern etched into its surface clearly continued beyond its boundaries. These are definitely designed to connect. Look at the interfaces. Maria nodded, studying her own puzzle. And the patterns match up. See how this swirl on mine leads into that one on yours, Sarah? Jenny held up her puzzle box, rotating it to show different angles. Mine has the same connection points too. And there are 20 connection points total? David, ever practical, did the math. 20 puzzles, 20 people. 1 piece each. If we have to combine all of them to get the answer, then by definition we all have to work together. But they said only one team wins, Sarah pointed out. Agnes looked around at the other teams, who were still working in suspicious isolation. Maybe that's the real test. How do you mean? Asked Frank. Well, look at them, Agnes gestured to the aliens. They all heard only one team can win and immediately decided that meant they had to beat everyone else. But what if the real test is whether we can figure out that we all win together, or we all fail separately? Sarah felt that familiar spark of insight. The cooperation test isn't about cooperating within our teams. It's about cooperating with everyone, even when we're told it makes us vulnerable. Classic prisoner's dilemma, David said. Cooperation benefits everyone, but individual betrayal benefits you in the short term. Except they've designed the puzzle so betrayal is impossible, Sarah finished. We literally cannot solve this without everyone's piece. Frank was already walking toward the nearest alien team. Hey, you math people, he called to the ethereal collective. Want to see something cool? Prime Logic Unit 7 looked up from its calculations, clearly suspicious. What do you want? Frank held out his puzzle box. Look at this connection point here. I bet it matches something on one of your puzzles. That could be a trick to steal our solution, Prime Logic Unit 7 replied. How would I steal a solution by showing you my piece? Frank asked reasonably. I mean, if I'm showing you mine, I'm making myself vulnerable to you. Not the other way around. Sarah joined Frank. Look, we can all keep building walls and protecting our secrets, but none of us will solve anything that way. Or we can admit that the only way to win is for everyone to win. She held up her puzzle box. My piece connects to Maria's and Jenny's and Agnes's and David's. But it also has connection points that don't match any of our pieces. Which means I need pieces from all the other teams too. Your logic is flawed, said a member of the crystalline hierarchy. If we share our secrets with you, you will have the advantage. Agnes smiled the patient smile of someone who had raised children and understood the fundamental illogic of territorial thinking. Sweetheart, how can we have an advantage if we all need each other's pieces to complete the puzzle? She's right, came a new voice. One of the hive-linked had broken from their group formation and was approaching with their puzzle piece. Our collective analysis indicates that each puzzle piece contains unique elements required for total solution. Competitive hoarding strategy yields 0 probability of success. The hive-linked being placed its puzzle box next to Frank's. The connection points aligned perfectly, and both boxes began glowing brighter. See? Jenny said excitedly. They're designed to work together. More beings began approaching, drawn by curiosity and the brightening glow of the connected puzzles. The apex predators, who had been growling protectively over their pieces, stopped when they saw their pack-hunting instincts were actually perfectly suited for coordinated puzzle solving. This is highly irregular, muttered Prime Logic Unit 7, but Sarah noticed it was edging closer to the growing cluster of connected puzzles. Maybe irregular is the point, Sarah suggested. Maybe the test isn't about following standard competitive protocols. Maybe it's about recognizing when the situation requires a completely different approach. Agnes was already making friends with a member of the Synthetic Ascended, comparing puzzle patterns and discussing how digital analysis could complement organic intuition. Maria was using her customer service skills to help coordinate between species who had trouble communicating. Jenny was simply enthusiastic about everyone's puzzle pieces, which somehow made everyone less defensive about sharing. David was doing what he did best, organizing the logistics of getting 20 different beings to work together effectively. And Frank was just being Frank, practical, straightforward, and completely unbothered by the political complications. Everyone else was worried about your species approaches competition in an unusual manner, observed one of the ethereal collective as Prime Logic Unit 7 finally brought their puzzles over to join the growing connected matrix, do we? Sarah asked. helping align a particularly tricky connection between a crystalline puzzle and a synthetic one? Or do we just recognize that this isn't actually a competition? The complete puzzle was forming into something beautiful, a three-dimensional mandala that seemed to represent all 20 different species' approaches to problem-solving, interconnected and interdependent. But the stated parameters clearly indicated that only one team could achieve victory, Prime Logic Unit 7 insisted, even as it helped fine-tune the mathematical precision of the connections. Yeah, and if we'd all listened to that, we'd all have failed, Frank pointed out. Sometimes you got to ignore what you're told and pay attention to what actually makes sense. The completed puzzle began to project a holographic display that showed all 20 species working together on massive projects, building space stations, terraforming planets, exploring galaxies. Each species contributed their unique strengths to achievements none could accomplish alone. Fascinating, Zephyr murmured, materializing beside the completed puzzle. You have achieved a 100% success rate. We all did, Sarah corrected. Every species here contributed essential pieces. But the parameters specified that only one team could win, Zephyr repeated. Agnes patted the alien administrator gently on what appeared to be its arm. Honey, just because someone says something doesn't make it true. Sometimes the rules are wrong. Jenny nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, like when teachers tell you not to work together on a test, but then the test is actually impossible to do by yourself. You have to figure out when the rule doesn't match what you actually need to do. Zephyr stared at the holographic display, then at the assembled beings from 20 different species, all working together to maintain and improve their collaborative solution. Your species appears to have a fundamental disregard for clearly stated competitive parameters, Zephyr observed. Our species has a fundamental disregard for stupid rules, Frank corrected cheerfully. Frank, Agnes said automatically. Sorry, Mrs. Agnes. Our species has a fundamental disregard for rules that don't actually help anyone. Sarah watched Zephyr make notes on its device. The administrator's expression was becoming increasingly thoughtful, and she thought, increasingly concerned. One more test, Zephyr announced. Bring it on, said Frank, and this time his confidence was echoed by voices in a dozen different languages from 20 different species. For the first time since the testing began, Zephyr looked uncertain. The fifth test began without warning and without explanation. Sarah found herself standing alone in what appeared to be her own apartment, but something was wrong. The lighting was too perfect, the details too sharp, and her goldfish Newton was swimming in patterns that spelled out words she couldn't quite read. Sarah. The voice belonged to her sister Lisa, but when Sarah turned, her sister's face was overlaid with swirling mathematical equations. I need your help. Mom's in the hospital. I need you to send me $10,000 right now or she's going to die. Sarah's heart clenched, but her mind remained clear. This isn't real. Lisa would never ask for money like that, and she'd call me, not appear in my apartment. The simulation flickered, then shifted. Now she stood in her laboratory, but her equipment had been upgraded to technology beyond anything on Earth. A figure that looked like her boss stood beside machines that hummed with impossible energy. Sarah, we've made a breakthrough. This technology can cure cancer, end hunger, solve climate change. But we need to test it on an unwilling population first. Just a small sacrifice for the greater good. Sarah shook her head. No, there's always another way. And you're definitely not my boss. He can barely figure out how to use the copy machine. Again, the simulation shifted. This time she stood in a beautiful garden with a being that radiated peace and wisdom. Sarah Chen, the being intoned, you have impressed us greatly. Join us in digital paradise. Upload your consciousness to our eternal realm. Leave behind your flesh, your limitations, your average human existence. Thanks, but no thanks, Sarah said immediately. I like my average human existence. It's mine. The simulations continued, each one more sophisticated than the last. Offers of power, threats against loved ones, logical arguments for abandoning human values, emotional appeals to transcend human limitations. Each scenario was perfectly calibrated to her psychological profile, designed to find the pressure point that would make her compromise. Sarah rejected them all, not because she was particularly virtuous or heroic, but because each offer required her to become something other than what she was. And what she was? An average human being with coffee stains on her lab coat and a goldfish named Newton. was something she valued. When the simulations finally ended, Sarah found herself back in the crystalline chamber alongside her fellow humans. They all looked slightly disoriented but fundamentally unchanged. "Well, that was weird," Frank said, shaking his head. "They offered me my own garage with the most amazing tools you've ever seen. All I had to do was agree to fix weapons for their war machine. I got offered a promotion to district manager of a coffee chain that would span galaxies," Maria added. "But I'd have to use slave labor to pick the beans." Agnes snorted. "They tried to convince me that my grandson would be better off if I let them enhance him to be more like their perfect children." "As if that boy needs enhancing. He's perfect exactly as he is," Jenny nodded. "They wanted me to upload my mind to become an immortal digital being. But then I wouldn't be able to hug anyone anymore. And what's the point of immortality if you can't hug people?" David straightened his tie, which had somehow remained perfectly in place through all the tests. "Business opportunity of a lifetime. I could have owned trading rights to entire solar systems. All I had to do was agree to exploit lesser species for profit." Sarah looked around at her fellow humans. "Did anyone take any of the offers?" "Hell no," Frank said, then looked at Agnes. "Sorry, Mrs. Agnes." "That's all right, Frank. Hell no is exactly right in this case. The alien teams, meanwhile, were looking confused and somewhat diminished. Several members of different species appeared to be missing. "Where are the others?" Sarah asked. Zephyr materialized, its expression unreadable. The character assessment offers each individual choices that reveal fundamental values. Those who accepted offers that required abandoning their essential nature or betraying their principles have been relocated. Relocated where? Agnes demanded with the sharp tone of someone who had raised children and could spot evasion from across a galaxy. "To positions more suited to their demonstrated character," Zephyr said carefully. "You mean they failed?" Frank said bluntly. "The test was designed to identify those whose commitment to their stated values is flexible under pressure." Sarah felt cold. "How many beings were relocated?" Zephyr consulted its device. "From the Ethereal Collective, 3 of 7 members accepted offers of greater logical precision in exchange for eliminating emotional influences from their decision-making. From the Crystalline Hierarchy, 4 of 6 members accepted promotions within our administrative structure in exchange for enforcing rigid order on chaotic populations. From the Synthetic Ascended, all members accepted integration into our digital collective consciousness." "And the others?" David asked. "The Hive-Linked refused all offers to optimize their collective efficiency. The apex predators rejected opportunities to hunt sentient prey. Your species," Zephyr paused, "refused all offers unanimously." Agnes nodded approvingly. "Of course we did. When someone offers you everything you want in exchange for becoming someone you don't want to be, the answer is always no." "But some of the offers were objectively beneficial," Zephyr pressed. "Greater intelligence, enhanced capabilities, freedom from physical limitations, access to advanced technology." "At what cost?" Sarah asked. "Everything that makes us who we are?" "Your current existence is demonstrably limited," Zephyr pointed out. "Short lifespans, physical weakness, emotional volatility, cognitive limitations, social dysfunction." Jenny laughed. "Social dysfunction? We're the ones who got everyone working together on the puzzle." "Yeah," Maria added. "And our emotional volatility is what made us help those hurt civilians instead of calculating optimal resource distribution." Frank nodded. "And our physical weakness is why we build tools and work together instead of trying to do everything ourselves." "Your cognitive limitations prevent you from achieving optimal solutions," Zephyr insisted. Agnes smiled. "Sweetheart, if optimal solutions require us to stop being human, then maybe optimal isn't what we're aiming for." Sarah studied Zephyr's expression. "That's what this has all been about, hasn't it? You've been trying to figure out why we're different, why we don't fit your models." "Your species exhibits paradoxical behavior," Zephyr admitted. "You cooperate with strangers, sacrifice for others' benefit, choose suboptimal solutions that help more people, maintain loyalty to flawed systems and imperfect individuals. By all logical analysis, your approach should lead to failure. But it doesn't," David pointed out. "We succeeded at every test." "Not just succeeded," Frank added. "We got everyone else to succeed too." Zephyr was quiet for a long moment. "The final assessment has been completed," Your species has demonstrated capabilities that our models did not predict. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now, Zephyr said, I must report to the Council that our fundamental assumptions about the nature of civilization may require revision. The remaining alien team members were looking at the humans with expressions ranging from respect to confusion to something that might have been envy. You could have had everything. One of the remaining ethereal collective members said to Sarah, power, knowledge, transcendence. Why did you refuse? Sarah looked around at her fellow humans. Frank with grease under his fingernails, Maria with her coffee shop apron, Agnes with her practical purse, Jenny in her school uniform, David with his slightly wrinkled business suit. Average people who had proven to be anything but average. Because, Sarah said, we already have everything we need. We have each other. Zephyr made one final note on its device. Fascinating, it murmured. Absolutely fascinating. The council chamber materialized around them without warning. A vast space that seemed to contain the light of 1,000 stars, with beings of impossible age and power arranged in judgment. Sarah felt very small standing there with her fellow humans, but also somehow exactly where she belonged. Archon Zephyr, spoke a voice that seemed to come from the cosmic background radiation itself. Present your findings on the species from the third planet. Zephyr stepped forward, its device glowing with accumulated data. Honored Council, the results are unprecedented. Murmurs rippled through the assembled beings, sounds that crossed species barriers and expressed universal surprise. The humans consistently demonstrated capabilities that exceed our predictive models, Zephyr continued. In navigation challenges, they ignored optimal pathways in favor of cooperative problem solving. In creativity assessments, they created multiple interconnected solutions instead of pursuing singular perfection. In crisis management, they abandoned hierarchical protocols in favor of adaptive response systems. The cosmic voice interrupted. These sound like failures to follow proper procedures. That was my initial assessment, Zephyr acknowledged. However, their approaches consistently achieved superior outcomes. They completed the maze faster than any previous test group. Their creative solutions addressed multiple real-world problems simultaneously. Their crisis response saved more lives while requiring fewer resources. Agnes raised her hand. Excuse me, Your Honors, but can we talk about what this is really about? The council fell silent. Sarah suspected they weren't used to being interrupted by test subjects. Your Honor, Agnes continued politely but firmly, you called us average. You said we were unremarkable, barely worth your attention, but I think you might be misunderstanding what average means. Elaborate, the cosmic voice commanded. Frank stepped forward. I'm a mechanic. Fix cars for a living. Pretty average job, right? But you know what mechanics really do? We look at something that's broken and figure out how to make it work again. We take systems that are failing and adapt them to keep running. We work with whatever parts we have available instead of waiting for perfect conditions. Maria nodded. I work in a coffee shop. Serve hundreds of people every day. Most of them stressed or tired or having a bad morning. My job is to make their day a little bit better. One person at a time. That's what most service workers do. We see people at their worst and try to help them feel a little more human. Jenny spoke up. I'm in high school. Still figuring out who I am, what I want to do. But every day I work with kids who are all different, all struggling with their own problems, all trying to fit in. You learn to adapt, to include people, to help each other out because nobody survives high school alone. David adjusted his tie. I manage supply chains, connect producers with consumers, make sure resources get where they're needed. Most of business is actually about cooperation, finding ways for different groups to work together profitably. Competition only works when it's built on a foundation of cooperation. Sarah took a breath. And I test soil for radiation contamination. Not very glamorous, but I'm protecting water supplies that thousands of people depend on, making sure their children can play safely in their yards. Most of science isn't about making grand discoveries. It's about quietly, carefully, making sure things work the way they're supposed to. This is what average humans do, Agnes said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades helping people. We fix things. We help people. We figure out how to work together. We adapt to whatever situation we're in and try to make it better for everyone. The council was silent for a long moment. You celebrate mediocrity, the cosmic voice finally said, but it sounded less certain than before. We celebrate humanity, Sarah corrected. Every single day, billions of humans get up and go to jobs that keep civilization running. They're teachers and plumbers and nurses and farmers and store clerks and truck drivers. They take care of their families, help their neighbors, solve problems with whatever resources they have available. Frank nodded. When disasters hit, we don't wait for authorities to tell us what to do. We help each other. When people are in trouble, we figure out solutions. When systems fail, we adapt and keep going. Your average people, Agnes said, making air quotes, are people who spent their whole lives learning how to be human, how to work with others, how to adapt to changing circumstances, how to solve problems that don't have perfect solutions. Jenny smiled. And you tested us against civilizations that gave up their humanity to become more efficient. But efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes the best solution is the one that helps the most people, even if it's not optimal. Maria gestured to the remaining alien test subjects. Look what happened during the character test. Your superior civilizations had members who abandoned their principles the moment they were offered something better. But humans, we said no to everything that would require us to stop being who we are. Because, David added, we understand that our limitations aren't bugs. They're features. We're weak, so we work together. We're short-lived, so we focus on helping the next generation. We're emotional, so we care about others' well-being. We're irrational, so we choose hope over logic when logic tells us to give up. Zephyr stepped forward. Honored Council, I must add an observation. During these tests, the human approach consistently inspired cooperation from other species. The remaining ethereal collective, crystalline hierarchy, hive-linked, and apex predators all adopted human-like collaborative strategies. The humans didn't just succeed, they made everyone around them more successful. Sarah felt a flush of pride, not for herself, but for her species. That's what average humans do. We don't try to be superior to everyone else. We try to help everyone be better than they were before. The cosmic voice was quiet for a very long time. You present a paradox, it finally said. By our measurements, your species should be failures. Short-lived, physically weak, cognitively limited, emotionally unstable, socially chaotic. Yet you consistently achieve outcomes that exceed our model's predictions. Agnes smiled. Maybe your models are missing something important. What? The voice asked. Love, Agnes said simply. We do all this because we care about each other. Not just our families or our tribes, but humans we've never met. People who will be born after we die, sometimes even beings from other species entirely. Frank nodded. When that little alien critter was hurt during the crisis test, we didn't stop to analyze whether helping it was optimal. We helped it because it needed help. And that's what average humans do, Sarah concluded. We see someone who needs help and we help them. We see a problem that needs solving, and we solve it. We see people trying to work together, and we find ways to make that cooperation stronger. The council deliberated in silence that stretched across dimensions. Finally, the cosmic voice spoke again. The classification is complete. Humanity is hereby designated a Class A civilization, with full membership privileges in the Galactic Council. Cheers erupted from the remaining alien test subjects. Several of them were crying, though Sarah wasn't sure all of their species had tear ducts. Furthermore, the voice continued, human approaches to cooperation, crisis management, and adaptive problem-solving will be studied and integrated into council protocols. We have much to learn from your average people. Zephyr approached the humans as the formal ceremony concluded. I owe you an apology. My initial assessment was based on fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of strength and intelligence. Sarah shook the alien administrator's hand. No apology needed. You couldn't have known. But maybe next time you're evaluating a species, ask yourself, what kind of people do they become when no one important is watching? And remember, Agnes added, patting Zephyr gently on the arm, average doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes it means exactly what the universe needs. As they prepared to return to Earth, Frank looked around at their new alien friends and colleagues. So do we get to tell people about this when we get home? Of course, Zephyr replied. You're ambassadors now, Jenny grinned. Wait until my chemistry teacher hears that I helped humanity pass an alien test by being good at group projects. Maria laughed. And wait until my manager finds out I'm qualified for intergalactic customer service. David was already taking notes. The trade opportunities alone will revolutionize Earth's economy. Agnes just smiled the satisfied smile of someone whose faith in human nature had been thoroughly vindicated. I can't wait to tell my grandson. He's going to be so proud. Sarah looked around at her fellow humans, these average, unremarkable, absolutely extraordinary people who had proven that humanity's greatest strength was simply being human. Come on, she said. Let's go home. We've got a world full of average people who are going to want to hear about this. As they teleported back to Earth, Sarah could swear she heard the cosmic voice murmur, "Remarkable, absolutely remarkable." And for once, average was exactly the right word to describe something wonderful.